When I was about 10 years old, my dad gave me a book that came with a disc inside the cover called The Game Maker's Apprentice. It was basically a tutorial series in written format for one of the most accessible early game engines, Game Maker. Now, I never got great at it, but I made tons of fun, simple, prototype level games for a few years until I lost interest for a while in high school. I looked for the old family laptop that had those games on it, and sadly, I'm sure it was tossed out a decade ago or more, but I always wanted to know how to take those games to the next level. Fast forward to today, I decided making games would be a fun thing to get back into because I now have a degree in computer science and I've always loved side projects. But also, honestly, a lot of the games I want to play just don't exist, so here we are. I started off learning Unity, which has great communities and tutorials, although, spoilers, I don't end up sticking with Unity, but once I had the basics, I got going with the Greybox prototype. I have several dream games in my head, but for now, I want to use this game to teach myself the hard parts. Learning the essential tools, modern best practices, dabbling with online multiplayer, and releasing a game that works. This will be a pirate battle royale with super streamlined controls and an arcadey feel. I want to make something more casual and team-based than the average battle royale, and I also want a pirate game with good PvP, which is something I think current titles miss the mark on, but we'll talk about that later. Now, the first milestone I'm setting for myself is to be able to play online with one or more friends, and we just shoot cannonballs at each other. I think multiplayer will be the hardest part of this project, so I'm trying to tackle the basics of that first, but before we get there, I need a good movement system. I set it up so each individual component is represented by a 3D vector, which is just an arrow, and they all combine into a movement vector, which is a bigger arrow. So, a simplified version, imagine this is the hull of my ship, and this is the rudder. I know math can be scary, but combining vectors is literally just addition, so if you combine these vectors, we get this output. And if we add in wind or other variables, our output reflects that. So basically with this, the more everything lines up, the faster you go. I separately added in rotations based on the movement vector and the difference between the rudder and the hull directions, and it all works together surprisingly well. Now I want the player to control a group of small sailors who can move to different stations that control the ship. I'm not adding in the crew just yet, but the broader mechanic of switching roles on the ship required learning Cinemachine, which is Unity's tool for controlling cameras. With camera control and a placeholder drop-down menu, I had a basic way of switching roles on the ship. With the Greybox concept working, I added in some bare-bones assets, and now it's no longer an infinite void simulator. From here I was able to add all the other basic mechanics like rotating sails and scouting from the crow's nest really quickly, and I remember feeling like I was actually getting the hang of things when a few features worked on the first try, like my crow's nest script, or cannonballs taking the ship movement into account. But of course, I had not yet met my first true challenger, multiplayer networking. You see, everything needs to be synchronized and dictated by the server to make sure everyone experiences the same game, and cheaters can't cheat. I had some fun problems like players taking control of each other's cameras, but I eventually got stuck trying to set up ship and cannonball collisions. Currently there's an error every time either of you hit the other, and you can sink yourself, but my sisters and one of my friends were all able to download and connect from their homes, and we could fight and everything. At this point, I was 95% done with that first goal, but before I worked out the last kinks, there was a catastrophic event. The Unity price change bomb of 2023. If you don't know what that is, the 10-second version is that a former EA exec came to Unity and a new payment model was announced that charges devs based on number of downloads, which is obviously a non-revenue metric, and it caused massive backlash. This is where progress just stopped for almost 4 months for me. I wanted to work on my project, but what was the point in continuing if I wasn't sure Unity was still a good choice? Sure, my small-time games will probably not have to worry about the price change, but it's also about principle and the long call. This is a learner project after all, and if I'm going to have to relearn a whole nother engine later, I'm wasting a lot of energy here. So, after finally making the call that it was for the best, I downloaded Unreal Engine. Now, I'll be honest, I thought Unreal would be as easy to learn as Unity. It's not. This is probably just noob speak, but Unreal feels super bloated. It's got so much more going on than Unity, and is clearly geared more towards art and artists, which will be great down the line when I want to collaborate with real artists, but for now, even just finding good tutorials using C++ has been a bit challenging because blueprints are so popular. I also decided I wanted to ditch my starter assets and started playing around with Unreal plugins and Blender. I want to use an Unreal solution for water, the sky, stuff like that, but I'd like to make original assets for my ship, sailors, and islands. I've used Blender before, so this wasn't a huge sidetrack, but this is where I just had to admit I was getting lost in the sauce. I was modeling my own Cherokee-class brig sloop and cannonades one moment and trying to figure out water and animations the next. Applying buoyancy to my own model was super satisfying, but it's time to reorganize and refocus. I've already nearly achieved my first goal in Unity, which is online multiplayer. I just need to replicate it in Unreal. But honestly, it's been long enough. I have way too much footage, and I'm starting to forget what I was even thinking in these old recordings. I just want to get this out there. Before I wrap up, I know people will say I was inspired by Sea of Thieves, and fair enough, I guess, but I really feel like Sea of Thieves got it wrong. When it came out, I played in the alpha testing, and I was super excited, but on launch, it was just no man's ocean. It was so boring. And no, I don't care about the post-release filler. PvP is terrible. Don't get me started on the anchor dropping meta where you just shoot yourself at the enemy ship. It obviously takes skill, it's quirky for the streamers, but it's just not a satisfying naval battle. It ruins the whole thing in my opinion. Sea of Thieves is really just a sailing exploration game with pirate skins. And if we're talking pirate authenticity, well, where's the endorsement of crime by the Crown? Where's the fully naked crew shouting nonsense to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies? God damn it, where is the anarcho-communist signaling of removing the captain's quarters, allowing organized mutinies, and equitable terms for the whole crew? Alright, I digress, because my game isn't going to have all of those either, but the pirate game that really inspired this got closed down in 2013. You see, growing up, I tried to get my little sister to play games like Halo or COD, but they just weren't her thing. One of the only games she ever really liked that I also thought was good was Disney Pirates Online. And let me just say for the uninitiated, this game was fire, especially for a movie-based game. It had free-to-play, and there were skills and quests, and you could play poker and gamble with other players, which may have contributed to being shut down actually, but it was just sick. Like, the main part was sailing with crew and fighting with ships. What I really remember is I would steer a ship, and my sister was on a cannon. We'd get a bunch of loot, sail into port, gamble it all away in an attempt to buy a bigger boat, and if you go broke, you just go back out on your current boat and plunder more British merchants. It just felt like a pirate world, and I hope to do that in my own way with this game. Anyways, wrapping up, my progress has been anything but linear. I go weeks at a time without working on this because it's not always fun to do programming type stuff in my free time, but I'm really enjoying it overall. I started learning Unity in early 2023, and the first recordings of the Gray Box prototype you saw are from last May. For the next video, I want to be back to the point where I have a basic multiplayer, but in Unreal, and hopefully I'll figure it out with properly synchronized cannonballs and ship health, and using their built-in physics engine. If you want to see that, stick around. Thanks so much for watching. I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments. Take care.